I'm arguing against the claim that medical marijuana needs to be legalized by the federal government due to its positive effects on the patients who use it as a treatment. My opponent presented two cases of people who use marijuana to treat the symptoms of their illnesses. He also claimed that the sales of medical marijuana accounted for $24 million of Oakland's GDP, $3 million of which should have been taxable. Most, if not all, information seems to be derived from the National Geographic film Marijuana Nation, a rather solid source. So I'm not going to nitpick and ask whether or not Dr. Abrams was really a doctor, or what his grades were in college, or if life started 3 billion years ago as opposed to 3 million years ago. I'm not going to berate my opponent by saying that he should have thrown more names around or given more information despite the fact that he was under a 6-minute time limit. But I digress. According to Dr. Abrams, his patient Robin Thaw was given medical marijuana to help her with lymphoma because it decreased nausea and vomiting and increased appetite brought on by her constant chemotherapy. I watched the film as well, and it seemed that the effects of marijuana were due to THC, something which Preston did mention. The same film also states that an Israeli doctor by the name of Raphael Meshulov managed to isolate THC, showing that concentrated THC could be given to patients without them ever having to see or touch marijuana, maybe in a pill form. They would never have to smoke it, they would never have to eat it or anything like that. Just take a pill. And according to my sociology professor, Dr. Liu, marijuana incurs different symptoms in different parts of the world. In Southeast Asia, for example, marijuana is decreased to decreased appetite. The effects of marijuana, according to my professor, were socialized into us, like some sort of huge placebo effect. So I went to WebMD to find out which medicines did actually decrease nausea, no matter where you took them. WebMD named a few: cyclozyme, dimenhydrinate, meclizine, and the ever-popular Pepto-Bismol. As for hunger, WebMD also prescribed cyproheptadine. And as for marijuana being able to create large revenues for the cities which decide to institute the facilities, well, I find that to be a rather unsound argument. Saying we should legalize something just because it would happen anyway has to be some sort of fallacy. Illegal immigrants come in all the time. Should we make anyone who sets foot on U.S. soil a citizen because doing so would increase tax revenues? Should we legalize automatic weapons because we too could tax those? Or legalize prostitution on the grounds that it happens anyway? Could we say the same of child pornography? The point being, medicinal marijuana is not needed because there are already working alternatives, and because the federal government, with the budget ranging in the trillions of dollars, according to GOPaccess.gov, doesn't need to risk national stability just to earn a few million more dollars.
All right, the advocate's claims are labeled. There's background information on the source that's being argued about, but it turns out that you're not really going to discuss that much, except for the one particular example. By the way, I was unclear why you didn't just argue on top of the synthetic THC possibility, that a single example is not usually enough to reach a conclusion about some benefit in this particular case. And later on, since you do suggest that it might even be a placebo effect, that in fact there is likely to be no real effect here except for the placebo effect. The claim about the synthetic THC, for instance, if you've done a little bit more research, you discover that the FDA has already approved synthetic forms of THC that are available for prescription that provide the benefits that are being described on this particular point. The point about the symptoms in different parts of the world and the idea that maybe it's a placebo effect, I did think that that was an interesting argument. Your proof on that, it would be nice if that was printed somewhere as opposed to a story that was passed on by your professor. I'm not saying that they are not correct in that, but it's hard for anybody to validate it unless we go and have that conversation with that particular professor. I like the argument that you made about alternative medications being available, and you gave us a list of other medications that could be applicable on this situation. There's one other argument I think you ought to make at this point, and that is that there's no demonstration that THC or medical marijuana is demonstrated to be superior to any of these alternative forms of medication. I think that's kind of implied, but I think it could be a little bit more explicit in your argument. And then you do kind of the same thing with the hunger issue, arguing that there are some alternatives available. You go through that very quickly. The argument about legalization for tax purposes, you basically minimize whatever potential advantages there are there. You do it again quickly with a very conclusionary piece of information, but at least you've got some information on that point. All right, thank you.